Welcome back, dear viewers. Our second guest of the evening is the amazing lawyer, Atyab Alshatti. Good evening, Atyab.
Thank you for the introduction. That was too much.
Thank you, thank you. A happy Women's International Day.
Happy International Women's Day,
yeah.
For everybody, for you as men contributing within this day, for all the women in Kuwait and women internationally.
Definitely. And we have an interesting subject, Atyab, for tonight. Like, will you please tell us more about it, about the custody of children when it comes to women? Will you please tell us more about it?
All right. Since today is the International Women's Day, then we should definitely dedicate this segment to elaborate more on the laws that tackle women's right, and basically women's right for her custody over her children. And what we have seen in the legal practice for the past years, that when women apply for custody, and of course when we talk about custody, we talk about the family law and family courts. Basically in Kuwait, that the most law that is being applied is the Islamic law, and that does not mean that other laws cannot be applied within the jurisdiction of the Kuwaiti courts, such as other religions, other countries' laws to be applied within the courts of Kuwait. So any other country's law can be applied within the jurisdiction of the courts of Kuwait.
Definitely.
But today, let's talk in specific about the Kuwaiti laws and the way they tackle custody. So, back to the experience that we have witnessed for the past years in which women demand custody over their children. According to the Maliki Kuwaiti law, women are eligible to obtain custody whenever they file for it, whether if they were divorced or not. But the question comes when a lawyer files a lawsuit for or in behalf of his client for custody without mentioning types of custody over their children. So most of lawyers, unfortunately, fall in this let's say, shortfall or gap when it comes to types of custody.
Exactly.
So let's say, for example, lawyer A files a lawsuit to obtain a custody for a woman. She gets the physical custody for the child, so the child gets to go with her. When she wants to apply for private schools, government school, any type of educational admission, then the challenge will start in which she's not able to admit the child. Why?
Definitely.
Because she does not have educational custody. This is when the challenge begins. So the challenge begins in a shortfall within the practice itself, coming from maybe a lawyer who is not sufficiently experienced, or people who do not ask for, let's say, professional lawyer to give them a specific advice about types of custody. So you might want to ask me now, what types of custodies are there?
Definitely. How many types?
So many, according to the needs of the child. What matters and what regulates and the provisions here is the actual needs that secure the life and secure the child to obtain all required assistance by the law, by the family, and of course to be endorsed with his guardian, whether if the custodian was a mother or a father. So it starts with the physical custody, but then you have the educational custody, in which the mom or the father who gets to have the custody gets to admit the child for the school. Later, you should have health custody, and the health custody was a big debate for the past years for women and women rights defenders, basically women rights activists, who advocated in a great movement in order to achieve such law change by civil society, actually. I mean, civil society are the ones who reached out for ministers and prime ministers and so in Kuwait in order to make that change. So before that ministerial resolution, women were not able to admit their children in order to, let's say, obtain major medical interference without the approval of the father. So let's say if there's a woman that is divorced and wants to get her child into some, let's say, an urgent case in which he needs an urgent medical interference. Or if it's urgent, the doctor himself can get the requisite approval. But in other cases, let's say, for example, the mom wants to get her daughter or her son to go under some kind of surgery. Without the health custody, she will not be able to do that. Without the health custody, she can only take him to get prior examination and some prescriptions for medications, but not really going into major surgeries. And then, thanks to the great effort of civil society activists and women's rights activists who made that change, but still, till today, because it can never be determined the types of medical interference that a child would need in the future for a mom to execute or undertake in order to secure his health. It is essential for every lawyer and every parent who is filing for custody is to demand for health custody. So we spoke about physical custody, educational custody, health custody. There is a third type that sometimes can be required, which is a higher educational custody. So let's say if the custody judgment was obtained for a minor, let's say 16 years old, who's going to join university in the future. So let's say they got a scholarship. Okay, and they want to study abroad. They will not be able to study abroad without having an approval from the guardian.
Exactly.
If the guardian or the woman who has the custody do not have the capacity to enroll her daughter or her son into this type of higher education that requires abroad study, then the custody is not sufficient. And therefore there is an urgent need for a higher educational custody. These are the major and most types of custodies required to be inserted within the lawsuit that should be filed when it comes to custody. So basically, a physical custody is never sufficient for a male or a female guardian, or let's say the custodian, to provide and supply the son or the daughter with a sufficient protection and all their requirements. Therefore, all these types of custodies must be obtained on the spot, in which I mean when the lawsuit is filed, all these types have to be mentioned and presented to the judge.
Exactly. So this leads us to the second question. It's another also controversial subject, or subject that's frequently asked. It's about the Article 5 of the citizenship law, that women can pass on their nationality to their children. So what's your take on that? What's your opinion?
This is a very good question, because most of women rights activists are demanding the eligibility for women to pass on their nationality to their kids. So basically, we have Article 1, Article 2 that gives the eligibility for the male to pass on his nationality to his kids. But unfortunately, women do not have it. And then, due to your great researches, I think you have found one of the sub-clauses that were mentioned in Article 5 of the Citizenship Code that makes women eligible to obtain the citizenship to their kids. But guess what? This is permissible to the Minister of Interior, not obligatory as Article 1 and Article 2.
So it's hard.
It is challenging. Not only because it's permissible for the minister, but there is another challenge of that. So the woman who wants to apply a citizenship, a Kuwaiti citizenship, for her daughter or son, her marital status, she has to be either divorced or widowed, in which we see there is a direct link between this right, this fundamental right, to her marital status. In my opinion, that does not make any sense, because it's a basic fundamental right to pass on the nationality and should not be questioned. Any woman should not be questioned whether if she is married or not. So my opinion as a lawyer, experienced lawyer, and a women rights activist, I believe that women should pass on the nationality to their kids without having to be
without being divorced or
widowed or divorced. There is no link between her marital status and the Article 5.
Does it pass automatically if in case of a woman being a widow or divorced, or there's other terms, or the case will be studied more?
Duly, there is an administrative circle in which any, let's say, request should pass on, and then it's permissible to get approved by the Minister of Interior. So yes, there is a lot of administrative, let's say, bureaucracies and administrative work that is going to take time. And then in the end, when we reach that decision of whether women can pass on the nationality to their kids or not, it is permissible.
Mm-hmm. So we mentioned the custody first. Mm-hmm. Then we mentioned mothers passing their citizenship
custody
to their,
and citizenship.
Definitely. And now let's go to another subject that is really important. It's women's rights. Mm. What happened to it exactly during the pandemic? Please tell us.
This is a big debate, actually. In fact, today there was an event that was held by the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands regarding whether if the COVID-19 pandemic affected women's rights or not. And basically there was huge, diverse debate on that. There were opinions, viewpoints, yes and no's, accept and do not accept. And basically when it comes to women's rights, and women activism. So there are two things that I would like to discuss for this question. When it comes to women activism, yes, it has an impact. So most of the people, for example, some women activists who work on environmental rights have noticed great changes, because when the pandemic came, there were lockdowns. People were not able to move and use their vehicles. So when it comes to environment activism, the environment enhanced in the pandemic. People are not using cars, there is no gas, there is no smoke in the air and pollution. So there is enhancement.
Definitely.
Other people basically who are active, or women basically who are active in other sectors, such as women's rights against abuse and so, would say a different opinion. Through the pandemic, there was a huge increase in domestic violence. And this comes to women's rights, basically, not only women activism. So in the pandemic, there was a study that is issued by civil society organizations, stated that through the time in the pandemic in which there were lockdowns and people were forced to stay in home, most of family members expressed anger against women in-house, which caused the increase of the abuse, whether if it was verbal, physical, mental, physiological abuse, in-house domestic abuse.
Okay, Atyab, you're a lawyer. We all know that you're a lawyer, but you just mentioned also you are a woman activist. Okay, so this subject, or when it comes to the pandemic and the abuse that women might face during the pandemic, it also needs to be supported by a woman activist, same as you. So when it comes to women activists in Kuwait, what are the required contribution for women to be an activist in Kuwait, or for women activity?
Okay, so first and foremost, we have to give a big thanks and big appreciation for all women rights activists in the country who give their full time and support to advocate for women's rights, support each other indoors, and welcome and, you know, help to contain any sort of violence or abuse or a violation when it comes to women's rights. We have civil society organizations such as the Women Cultural Society, Girls for Girls, Seroptimus, Abolish 153, and many women rights activists in Kuwait who are dedicating their time to change and to enhance women's rights in Kuwait. That's great. When it comes to civil society. On the basis of the government, I would highly go back to human rights activists, because activism to women's rights is a part of human rights activism. And in Kuwait, we don't have a specific law that regulates or determine the work of women's rights activists and human rights defenders. So we do have a lot of famous human rights defenders who do their work on daily basis through social media, on the field, on the ground, through their work everywhere in Kuwait and outside of Kuwait, Kuwaitis themselves who are dedicating their effort to advocate for women's rights and human rights, basically. But there is no law that regulates their work in and out. There is no immunity. There is no protection for their work, even though their work is sensitive, because you are basically tackling a gap or a shortfall in the law in which you are asking decision makers to help amending and covering that gap and coming up with a better, enhanced law, bill draft, resolution, or ministerial resolution. So this is a sensitive work. And the same applies on women's rights activists. For the past decades, we have names who worked on women's rights, such as you have the Cultural Society, Women Cultural Society, Lubna Al-Qadi, May Al-Hajjaj, a lot of women. I don't want to mention some and miss some. Okay, so these women...
Special greetings to all of them.
Special thanks to all of their work. So these women dedicated, as I told you, their time and effort and experience on social level, legal, physiological, any medical, any sort of experience they had. And yet never really tackled or never really been protected through their activism by the law.
Okay. Thank you so much, Atyab Alshatti. You are a great lawyer, and also I'm sure a lot of women, or all women in our lovely country, Kuwait, are proud of you as women's rights activists. So I really hope you enjoy your evening, and happy International Women's Day to you again.
To you too. Thank you for having me today.
It's our pleasure for having you tonight. The viewers, let's go now, or before we go to our report, we just had with us lawyer Atyab Alshatti. She's really amazing. We're looking forward for her next segment next week. Let's go to our third report. It's about Bab Dukala Farm. Stay tuned.